People rise to noble heights to condemn chattel slavery, while at the same time they are willingly becoming slaves of the state. And the end is exactly the same. Somebody owns you and you give up your freedom. Now, what elements of society and politics produce this willing kind of state slavery? You need a mass psychosis. You need a mass psychosis, something that makes everybody afraid, like a plague, like a pandemic, like masks, that create a greater threat than the giving up of freedom. People rushed into giving up their freedoms when there was a threat that created a mass psychosis. Keep up the deception so they continue to believe the lies and you escalate control.
So one of the questions that I've been asked so many times is, how should churches respond to government prohibitions on worship, that places of worship must be closed in the interest of public health and safety during these recent times? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over an incredible article that I read this morning. It could be considered very controversial in some of the things that it goes into, and I'm actually going to put a link to the full article in the description below so that you can read it for yourself. It's quite a lengthy blog, and in this video I'm just going to go over and some of the highlights and the main takeaways from this. And when I share something like this of another preacher, it's not to esteem this particular person, it's not to esteem a man, and it doesn't mean that I endorse all the theology of the individual as well. I'm simply pointing you towards what I consider to be a valuable resource on a particular topic. And this is someone who is far more qualified and educated on this particular area than I am. And I want to give you the best information available so that you can form perspectives which are informed perspectives. Now, this blog is very controversial and I can't actually share some of the details that it shares, but you can check that out for yourself. What I will say to you is that it tells you what this COVID thing is and what it isn't. It tells you the information that was communicated to people, and then different information which was communicated to people, and that which is actually true and that which is a lie. And it uses an incredible number of credible statistics in there to support its position on this particular situation. So that's all I'll say about that. What I would say is that it is a must read, and you should check that out for yourself if you want to have your eyes opened to this situation. And this blog goes on to talk about what's going on in the broader picture here in this situation and going forward, the implications of that for the church, and also how we as Christians should respond. So I'm actually just going to read out chunks of this for you so that you can get a feel for the most important parts of this blog post. So I've got here that he says, "We are convinced that government encroachment on basic human freedoms constitutes a more intimidating threat to individuals, a greater impediment to the work of the church, and a larger calamity for all society than any pestilence or any other natural disaster. These are difficult times calling for a thoughtful, biblical, and wise response from church leaders and their congregations." He then goes on to say that ideologically driven propaganda and government pressure are routinely paired with efforts by big tech companies to squelch all dissenting opinions. Meanwhile, throughout most of the Western world, government agencies have worked hand in hand with the media to cultivate open hostility towards biblical values while actively promoting the normalization of abortion, homosexuality, transgenderism, and various other assaults on the family structure. It is no wonder that public trust in the government and media has severely eroded over the past decade. And in his view, this is not a time where the church can remain passive and allow their rights to be taken away. It says that it would be sinfully negligent for any church to remain passive or pliant when waves of misinformation dominate popular opinion and deliberately foment anxiety. What makes the current case especially urgent is the way that officials have intentionally fueled public angst with relentless propaganda, then exploited the public's fear in order to justify banning public worship, even while bars, strip clubs, casinos remain open, and radical political protests are permitted to swarm the streets, i.e. the hypocrisy and the double standard that is going on in government policy. He says that churches should be the last place on earth where purveyors of immoral values, half-truths, lies, and tyrannical abuses of authority find any kind of approval. So what he's implying here from my reading is that these government authorities are not acting in accordance with a government which is acting in the best interest of its people, as per obeying authorities in Romans chapter 13. And it also says in the article that the government does not actually have the authority to decide when and where and how the church will worship, but that authority is outside of the sphere of government authority and is only held by the Lord Jesus Christ. It says that this current situation is a wake-up call and a reminder to believers of how tenuous their liberty is. Pastors in supposedly free countries were literally jailed for weeks because they led worship services during the 2020 lockdowns. Despite court decisions favourable to churches, a strong current of public opinion favours giving governments more powers to force churches to comply with restrictions, inhibiting attendance, fellowship, and congregational singing. So he's basically saying that although we technically have these freedoms under the Constitution, or wherever they may be found in the various countries, he's talking specifically about America, he's talking about Canada as well, these are not freedoms that we should take for granted because they are tenuously held at the moment. They're being threatened, and the opposition is absolutely pushing things to the limits to try to take away these freedoms from us. So now I'm going to go into the last part of the blog here, where he says that in the face of all of this pressure that's going on and attempts to try to erode the liberties and freedoms that we have under the Constitution in America, it says that Western evangelicals now need to have that same resolve and prepare ourselves for more pressure from governments and more persecution from the rest of society. When this current situation has run its course, if it ever does, other crises are already lined up for government officials to exploit, claiming emergency powers to assert more and more regulatory authority over the church. Fears over climate change, the campaign to normalise sexual perversions, imaginative applications of social justice, and a host of other major ideological shifts have speedily and dramatically changed the climate of virtually every Western democracy already. Some of the people who now wield power for making public policy believe that the gospel and its truths are a form of hate speech. Churches in this part of the world have already lost much of our civic freedom. It is past time for the Church of Jesus Christ to confront the prevailing falsehoods of a depraved society and show hopeless people the way to the true hope and abundant life. We are the Lord's ambassadors, and we must stand confidently in that role with joy and not fear, in bold unity, and all the more as we see the day of Christ drawing near. So what he's saying in essence is that there is a strategic attempt to limit and restrain the freedoms that the church has and that believers have. And if we allow them to do this in an unconstitutional manner, then it's going to make it far more easy for them to continue to do this and to greater measures of this. This situation isn't just going away because there are a number of other agendas which are going to be used in the name of health and safety to restrain the freedoms of the church in the future. So this isn't something that we can just be ignorant to and hope that it goes away. Now is the time when we can either stand up and claim those freedoms, or we could potentially lose those permanently. And what he says is that we're to do this in a way that is joyful, that is not based in fear. We are to make a stand for truth, and we're to continue to proclaim the gospel. And really what he's getting at here is that this is not the end of what's happening. This is just the beginning, and we need to be prepared as believers and as a church for more government persecution. Make sure that you subscribe to Line of Fire Ministries. I do short videos to encourage, inspire, challenge and convict. And I also like to be able to discuss some of these current issues that are going on at the moment, and to point you to the best resources that I have personally found when I don't have all the answers for these situations. Thank you for watching, friends.